Okay. Ṣọlá sọ̀rọ̀ ìdí ìlú pàtàkì.
I'm setting up the YouTube now, so I'll send the link to. Hello, I think we know the rules, right? We know the rules and regulations. Kindly mute yourselves, right, upon joining. So I can hear someone shouting birthday girl. Please kindly mute yourself, or else I'll remove you from this class and you'll not be able to join again. Yes, like I've always said, do not type your name, matric number, and all. Do not send it via the chat. All right. I don't want to see any of that. So now I will paste the YouTube link. want to see any of that. So now I'll paste the link for. Okay, good morning, everyone. Do not respond by audio. So if you can hear me, kindly respond via the chat box by typing good morning or I, so I will know that you guys can hear me clearly. Okay, all right, thank you. And also, has any of you been able to join via the YouTube link? So is the YouTube link active? Let me see if people have joined or okay, I think we have 29 people watching. Okay, so I want to believe people can also join us via YouTube. All right. So last week or 2 weeks ago, before we went on break, we started Visual Basic, right? So I was able to introduce us to the VB environment, and we looked at some basics in the VB programming. We looked at variables, how you declare variables in VB. We looked at data types, right? We discussed about data types in VB. So but we could not look at control structures in VB. So that's where today's class will be starting from. We saw controls and commands, your label, your text box, your command button, and so many other controls in Visual Basic. So, and we're able to see the properties of these controls, and now you set the properties of these controls as well. So we looked at all of these in our class last week. So today's class will be focusing more on control structures in VB, because this is equally an important aspect that would want us to look at. Okay. So now I will share my screen. So please, if you can see my screen, kindly respond via the chats. Wait, someone said he can't hear anything, but can everyone hear me? I think people can hear me now. Others can hear me. Maybe you should, people can see my screen and they can hear me as well. So check your phone speaker. Okay, all right, thank you. So you have to, the YouTube link isn't working. Why? Let me send it here again. Okay, I've just resent the YouTube link. So I've just resent it. more people are joining. So I want to believe you can.
Probably like that.
Okay, so we stopped here last week. We stopped here last week. You can see end of lecture one on Visual Basic. So today we'll be looking at control structures in Visual Basic. Thomas Omodele, kindly turn off your video, or else I'll log you out. So as you can see, Visual Basic, in fact, even Python, almost all the programming languages, right? They execute instruction statements in three ways. And this does not leave VB out. VB executes instruction statements in three ways. We have sequence, selection, and what and looping. Sequence, I think this is straightforward. Sequence in the sense that the instruction statements are executed one after the other, right? That's in the order in which they are written in the program. If you can remember, we wrote some codes last week, right? Where we have to do, before you use a variable, right? You have to declare the variable. You don't start using a variable before you declare the variable, right? So when you get to that stage where you want to use the variable, that variable must have been declared before you can use it, because the execution of the program statement is what is sequential. So this means that instructions are executed one after the what, one after the other. That's in the same order in which they are what written in the program. Though in some cases, An instruction may require a transfer, all right, or a skip. That is maybe when you have decision making, and if this thing is true, maybe we should go to a different function that is allowed, right? But just know that execution of instructions is in what, in a sequential manner. So the second one is what, selection. That's the other second control structure that we'll be looking at, selection. So in selection, you basically have your instructions. You have several instructions to execute, right? But which instruction is executing is depending or is dependent on on some other instructions or conditions. You can make a decision such that, for example, maybe you have a variable such as age, right? And you have something like, yes, if age is what, greater than or equal to 18, it should tell you that you are an adult. And if age is less than 18, it should tell you that what, you are a child or something. There you are making a decision. So in looping, you have a group of instructions, right, that you want to what, repeatedly execute until a condition is what, satisfied. So in looping, we have unconditional and conditional looping, right? So in unconditional what, looping, you know the number of passes that the loop must pass through. You know that in advance. Whereas in conditional looping, the loop continues, right, until a particular condition is what, is satisfied or met. So for looping, we have unconditional and what, conditional looping. That person is studying my class. So once you are not muted, I've told you I'm going to remove you. If you don't tell you,
Go tell.
so as you can see, I just removed some people. I will not remind you to what, to mute yourself. So once I say that you are disturbing my class or your mic is not muted, I will remove you automatically. Okay. So now let's look at selection. All right. In sequential, we really don't have much to talk about there because I've already told us that instruction statements are executed in the order in which what they are written in your program. So that's sequential. So selection where you have to choose from two or more alternatives. Let's see how that is done in Visual Basic. So in Visual Basic, we have the what? We have the if-then statement in Visual Basic. We have the what? The if-then statement in what? In Visual Basic. So, and what is it used for? The if-then statement is used to execute what? A single statement or a module of statements or on a conditional basis. In VB, we have two forms of these statements, and there we have the syntax, if-then. So if followed by your what? Logical expression. Here, this is the syntax for the if-then statement in Visual Basic. You have if, which is a keyword. This if is followed by what? Logical expression. This can be a condition. For example, looking at the example that I gave earlier, if age is greater than 18, that age greater than 18 is what? It's a logical expression. And it's going to have one of two possible values, true or false. Because for every condition, there is two possible values. Is either that condition is what is true or it is not, based on the values that you're supplying or your parameter values, right? So the condition can either be true or what, or false. So if logical expression, then what should happen if that condition is true or if that condition is false? So after then you have what executable statements or what or statements. So and as you can see, if it's just single, if it's a single statement, you might not need the end if. All right. But if you have one or more statements under that logical expression, right? So you will need the what? The end if. So here we have the syntax for what? For the if then statement in Visual Basic. And you can see I have an example here to illustrate what this if then statement or how this if then statement is used. So let's look at this example that we have here. Write an if then statement for this situation. So, and what's the situation that we have there? If salary collected is what is greater than 10,000, the tax payable is what 10%. I think this is very clear. To us, this is an English statement, right? And of course, we have to translate it to what Visual Basic we understand, right? This is just an English statement. So we have to translate it to what the VB environment we understand. If salary collected is greater than 10,000, tax payable is what 10%. Well, here they have not told us what should happen if that salary is less than 10,000, right? They only told us that if that salary collected is greater than 10,000, tax payable is what 10%. As you can see, we have the code that can do that for us here. If salary is greater than 10,000, of course, we know that to translate that to VB is if. If it's a keyword, we cannot change that. If you look at the syntax that we have up there, if salary greater than 10,000, that this is what we translate that as in Visual Basic. Can you see? There's a variable called salary, right? And we are checking if that variable is greater than 10,000. If this is true, then what should happen?
Sorry, please,
Tax
please.
equals to what? 0.1 times salary. So what is that 0.1? 0.1 is the
Sorry.
same thing as 10%, right?
This is
10
it.
over 100.
Maybe is that
That's
my
the
friend that came to
0.1. Who is
buy
that person
spaghetti?
not muted?
Okay. But I'm not sure yet.
Okay, don't worry. That your friend will remove you now. Go and join on YouTube. Okay. So we have that here. If salary is greater than 10,000, then that then is a keyword. You must put it. If you don't put it, because the syntax is if then. So if that condition is true, it is followed, the statement or the condition is followed by then, which is another keyword. After then you have the executable statement. That is the statement that you want to execute or you want to be executed once that condition is what is satisfied. And at the end, the last statement there is what end if, meaning that you are closing the what the if condition. That if then statement, you are closing it. You use end if to what to close it. If it's just a simple statement or a single line statement, then you might not need the end if. But in a case where you have more than one statement, right, more than one executable statement under that logical expression, then you need to what to close it with what end if. So we are going to practicalize some of this later. So let me quickly rush through the slides. So that is what if then statement. So in VB, we also have the what if then else statement. If you look at the first example that I gave, we only said what should happen if that salary is greater than 10,000, right? That means if the salary is less than 10,000, nothing will happen because we only said if that salary is greater than 10,000, tax payable is what 10%. But what if the salary is less than 10,000? We have not told VB that, oh, this is what should happen in a case where the salary is less than 10,000, right? Okay. So there we have just one logical expression to what execute. But if then else statement is if this condition is true, do this. Else, that else, you don't need to attach a condition to it because else is going to be the negation of the logical expression. For example, if age is greater than 18, print you are an adult, or it should tell you that you are an adult. Else, You don't have to put or attach a condition to that else, because else already negates that condition. The condition is if age is greater than 18. So the else is what? If age is less than what? Less than or equal to what? 18. So you don't have to attach a condition to else, that's else, condition greater than no. Else is just automatically going to negate that logical expression that you have. So you don't need to attach a condition to it. So, and as you can see, here we have an example. So once I'm through with this logical expression, with this selection statements or selection control structure, I have some examples here that I would want us to test or to run. So I will open the VB, I will launch the VB environment so we can test some of these codes. So you can see the syntax for the if, then, else statement in VB. If, just as we have in the previous case, if is followed by a logical expression, then we have then after that. So the statement that you want to execute, followed by what else? The else, as you can see, there's no logical expression attached to what else. So after else, those statements that you want to execute after else, you have them under what? The else block or structure. And in the end, you end it by what? You close the whole condition statement by what? By end if. So here we have an example. As you can see from here, we have write an if then else statement that will set a string variable called drink to hot tea, right? If the Boolean variable flag is true or ice water otherwise. I think this is clear. It should set a variable. I think we know what a variable is. A string variable called drink. They've named it a string variable called drink to what? Hot tea. If Boolean variable flag is true, you can see that Boolean variable flag is the what? Is a logical expression. That is, that would be true or false. Then depending on the value, if it is true, it should set drink to hot tea. If it is false, it should what? Set drink to what? Ice water. And that's the code that we have here. If flag is equal to true, then drink equals to what? Hot tea. Else, you see that for else, I don't have to put flag equals to false, because else automatically means that if flag is not true. And what does that imply? That implies that what? If flag is false. So I don't need to now attach that condition to else, because else automatically negates whatever condition that I have up there. So drink equals to what? Ice water. So if you look at this if then else, here we have just two conditions or two expressions. One is if that condition is true, and the other one is if that condition is what? Is false. So if then, that is if it is true, else if it is false. So that's exactly what we have there. Okay, I have to do the environment here, so I'll use that. And also, now before I proceed, this second one only works when we have two possible options, right? Or two possible alternatives. If this is this, do this, else do this. So we have just two what? Alternatives, just two options. But in this case, now let's see what happens when we have more than what? What happens when you have more than the two options? So we have what? The if then else if statements. That is, this can help us to take care of, let me say, three or more alternatives or options. And I think I have an example after this, so we can quickly run through the examples that we have. So when you have more than two options, that is three or more alternatives, VB has specific statements that handle this type of what? Selection. So we have the what? If then else if statements. And you can also make use of the select case. So I have examples for both. So for the if then else if statement, the syntax is as highlighted in red. You can see if logical expression, then executable statement. That is, if that logical expression is true, do this. Else if you have another logical expression, else if do this. The else if can be repeated depending on the number of options or alternatives that you have. And in the end, you can now have else. That is, if none of the previous logical expressions, right? If none of them is what is true, that else will now be what executed. So if this logical expression, then this is what you should do. Else if this logical expression, this is what you should do. Else if this logical expression, this is what you should do. So all these logical expressions come before else. Else is now, if none of those logical expressions is true, maybe you have like 5 or 6 logical expressions and none of them is true. So that's when the else is now going to be what executed. So, and yeah, remember I said we are considering 3 or more alternatives. We've seen a situation where we considered just one, right? That's one for the salary. We've seen a situation where we considered for 2 options only. That is if then else. That's just 2 options only. If this, do this, else, do this. That's 2 options or 2 alternatives only. Then we have if then else if. That is when we have what more than 2 options. If this, do this. Else if this condition is true, do this. Else if this condition is true, do this. The else if can be repeated as many times as possible, depending on the kind of program that you are trying to write. And in the end, if none of those previous conditions is what is met or satisfied, then you have else, which will then be what executed. So let's look at the example that we have there. Write a section of code in Visual Basic that will take in a number 1 through 7 and print out the day of the week. Let me accept. Let me accept some other participants. Okay, let me leave this a consistent. Okay, leave so consistent. Sorry, let me try to accept some other students or admit some other students. Admit all. Okay. Please, as you are joining, kindly mute yourself so you don't disturb my class. So write a section of code in VB that will take in a number 1 through 7 and print out the day of the week. I think this is very clear. Now let me go over it again. Write a section of code in VB that will take in a number 1 through 7, right? And print out the day of the week. So what does this mean? That is, the code should accept 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you get it up to 7 from you? And depending on the number that you enter, all right, or that you input, it's going to print out the day of the week based on that number. For example, if you enter 1, right, it will tell you today is Monday. If you enter 2, it will tell you today is Tuesday. If you enter 3, it will tell you today is Wednesday, because we have just 7 days in a week, right? Monday to Sunday. So depending on the numeric value or the integer value that you enter, right, it's going to print out the day of the week based on that number, all right? So the code for that is in the next slide. You can see here we have the code for that. So we have to deem day of the week as string. We can even make it an integer. So we'll try that now. Day of week equals to what? I remember I said you can make use of an input box, or you can also say, okay, let a text box. I want my value to be entered in a text box. Either way, there is no problem, all right? So day of week equals to input box. You can use input box to receive input, all right? Day of week is input box, enter a day of the week. 1 for Sunday, 2 for Monday, depending on how you want it to be. So then, if you look at this, we have many options. Why? Because you can enter 1, you can enter 2, you can enter 3, you can enter 4, 5, 6, and 7. And depending on whichever one you enter, the day of the week is going to be what? Printed. So here you see that you have about 7 conditions to be executed, or 7 logical expressions. If day of the week is 1, that day of week equals to 1, that's a logical expression. Else if day of week equals to 2, that's another logical expression, right? Else if day of week equals to 3, that's another logical expression. You see, here we have more than what? 2 options. That's why we used what? The if, then else if statements, because this can cater for 3 or more alternatives. If it was just 2 options, right? If it was just 2, that would be if and else. But here we have more than 2, so that's why we have if and several else if statements before we finally close it with what? Else. And if you look at that else is the if up to else if, they catered for numbers through 1 to 7. Else means if you now enter a number that is outside that range of 1 to 7, because as you can see, the program is taking care of 1 to 7. Else means if you enter something else, something different from 1 to 7, that's the message that will appear. Only 1 through what? 7. To now tell you that no, you have entered something else. Depending on whatever message that you want it to print, all right? That's what it will print out. So I think that's okay. So remember I said for if then else, it's either you make use of this or you make use of the word select case. So the select case is not too different from it's just slightly different from that of if then else if. You can use any of them. So any of them is okay. If you are more comfortable with if then else if, you can use that. Or if you think you are more comfortable with select case, you can also want to use that. This is just an alternative to the if then else if statements. Okay, I can see a message that someone cannot hear me. I want to believe it's only you, because if others cannot hear me, they would have mentioned that via the chat. So I want to believe that you are the only person that cannot hear me or something. So can others hear me? Okay, people can hear me. All right, thank you. So I think you have to check your speaker and make sure that the setup is correct. Maybe you should join. Try to join via audio. So join via audio. So you can be able to make use of your mic and speaker. All right. Then else if. So you can decide that you want to use the select case. You can see dim day of week as string. We have that there. So the value of what? Day of week. So and remember, if you look at the previous slide, this slide, our logical expression is based on what? Day of week. Because it is that day of week, that variable day of week, that's what will determine what will happen, right? So that variable is what we need to make our decision. If day of week is 1, if day of week is 2, if it is 3, if it is 4, if it is 5, if it is 6, if it is 7, the day of week is expected. We expect that day of week to have what? A value, which can be from 1 to what? 7. So it's that variable that you will need here to make that decision. So the syntax here is what? Select case. After case, then that variable name, that variable that is going to be the determinant of your what? Logical expression, day of week. That's the variable. So select case based on that day of week. And what are the what are the values that you can have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can see case 1. What that means is that if day of week is equal to 1, case 1, case 2, meaning that if day of week is equal to what? 2, case 3, that is if day of week is equal to 3, it's just similar to what we have there. So instead of you saying if day of week is equal to 3, since you are selecting the case based on day of week, so the various values that day of week can have, those will be your what? Those ones will be your case values. Case 4, that is if it is 4, 5, 6, 7. Case else, This means that if it is not any of the values that we stated here, that is, if it is not any of the values from 1 to 7, then we have that message box 1 to what? 1 through 7. And just as you can see, for the if statement, we always end it with what? And if, right? So here we end it with what? And select. So that's the last thing there. And we have these examples here for us to try. So now let's try one or two examples based on what we have done on that selection structure. So I will switch to the other system now. So all right. I've switched to my other system, but before I proceed, I want to be sure that everyone can hear me. So can you still hear me? You know the tradition, kindly respond via the chats only. Okay, all right, thank you. I need to stop sharing my screen. Can you see my screen? Please, can you see my screen? Is that? Can you see my screen now? I can see it on the other system now. Okay, thank you. So now let's try to run some of these codes. Okay. So let's try this. We have this for, that's the first one for salary greater than 10,000. So now let's say we have a text box, right? To capture the value of the salary from us. So we need the label. So let me say, let's call that enter salary or something. So the caption for that should be enter salary. So the text box that should capture the salary from us, so it has to be empty, all right? And we need somewhere where the tax should be displayed. So let's say the tax should be displayed here, the value of the tax. This is a label, another label. So let's say tax value, okay, and which is supposed to be 10% of what of your salary. So we have another text box to say that value. Who is that person? Who is that person? Which So we have tax value. So let's have a command button. I will make use of just one command button. So to execute the code. So let me say compute, all right? So we know to write the code, you click on your command button. So we have that. The value of the salary, if we enter the text one. So dim, let's say salary, let me call it S, a single, okay? So, and the value is whatever I have in the text one, right? So whatever I have in text one dot text. Okay, so if that captures the value, then based on that value, I have to make a decision. If S, that's the salary. Okay, let me just use salary since we use salary in the slide, so you don't get confused. But of course, we know it's a variable name, so we have salary. So if that salary is greater than 10,000, that salary is greater than 10,000. Remember, I told us that after this we have to put then, right? Then. So then what should happen? So then tax. So let me dim my tax also as single. Dim salary, comma tax. So tax is what 10%, which is 10 over 100, or you say 0.1, 0.1 times salary. I want the value to be displayed in text2. So say text2 dot text2 dot text equals to what? Tax. So with this now you can run your code. So if let's say the salary is okay, it's only when let's say it's 5,000, nothing should happen. Can you see? Okay, and if okay, we have if without end if. So can you see? That's why I told you that the end if is important. So okay, now let's run that. You can see tax value is 0. That's because we declared tax as single. So since we've declared it as single, the default value for a single value is what? 0. That's why you can see 0 there. It's not that it's computing anything, because the code is only catering for salary greater than 10,000. Okay, now let's enter a salary greater than 10,000 now. Let's say 50,000. Can you see? 10% of 50,000 is 5,000, right? But if you enter any value lower than 10,000, nothing will happen. It will just return the default value for what? For a single variable. So nothing will happen, because in your code, you have only catered for if salary is greater than what? 10,000. So that is just if then statement. You only have one logical expression, and you're only taking care of the, should I say, truthfulness of that logical expression. You are not considering the other side of the logical expression, because it can either be true or what, or false. So now for us to have double statement now, so what do we need? So for us to cater for, let's say now let's try to, okay, so now let's say if it is greater than 10,000, the tax is 10%. Anything less than 10,000, all right, the tax is 2%. So now we can see that we need, so else, if salary is greater than 10,000, then tax is what? Is 0.1 times salary. Else, meaning that what? Yeah, good morning, how are you? So else, now let's say the tax here, our tax is 10%, right? If it is greater than 10,000. Else, so let's say 2%. And what is 2%? I think 2% is 0.02. Else tax equal to 0.02. That's 2% of the salary. Now, you see that for else, we didn't put the condition that else salary is less than 10,000. Nope. Because if salary is greater than 10,000, that's a logical expression. Else is, you don't need to state it out categorically, but the system already knows what the else of that statement, that logical expression should be. So the else, you are not seeing it, but the system knows that the else of that is anything less than or equal to what, 10,000. So you don't attach a what, a condition to what else. All right. So else, make tax 0.02 of salary, and if, that is, tax will be computed depending on the value of what, salary. So now let's run this. Initially when we entered 5,000, right, the tax value returned was 0, and I explained the reason for that, that it's returning the default value of what, of a single variable, of a floating point number, which is 0.0. Now if we run this, let's enter the same 5,000 that we entered initially and gave us a tax of 0. You see that the value has to change now. You can see the tax value now is 100, because we have said else make the tax 2% of whatever your salary is. So if you entered 9,000, I think that should be 180, right? So let's enter 9,000. That is still less than 10,000. You can see 180. If you enter 10,000, what should the tax value be? Should it be 10% of 10,000 or 2% of 10,000? Of course, we know that should be what? 2%, because we only said if salary is greater than 10,000, not greater than or equal to. So if you say 10,000, you can see 2% of 10,000 is 200. But if you want it to be from 10,000 upwards, you just say if salary is greater than or equal to 10,000. So now let's run this now. Initially 10,000 gave us 200, but now 10,000 should give us 1,000. So you can see 10,000 is giving us 1,000, because it's no longer greater than 10,000. We've changed it to greater than or equal to what? 10,000. All right, so that's for that. Here we've seen if then, and we've seen if then else. So let's just try the other example that we have, which is for what? If then else if. Remember, if then else is when you have just two alternatives. Here we can see we have two alternatives. One is if it is greater than 10,000, greater than or equal to 10,000, make it 10%. Else, that is, if it is not up to that, make it 2%. It's just two options. One of two, and one of the two possible options must be what? Executed. So in a case where you have three or more options, that's when the what? If, then else if, else if, else if, else if, else, right? That's when that one comes into what? Into play. And just as I showed us during the lecture, I showed us an example where you have, okay, so now let's look at this particular example. So this particular one, we don't need the what? The text box. So let me My mic is muted. Let me just type this thing. Let me type it. The system is hanging. Please, can you see my screen? Okay. So what I'll do is I'll send the slides to you so you can practice some of the codes that we have here. So this is another example where we have the grade. For example, what this is going to do is it will take your grade from you. So let's say, or your score from you, maybe between 0 and 100, right? If you get 70, I think our grading system here from 70 to 100 is A, right? 60 to 69 is B. So it's going to take your score from you. So once it asks you for your score, you can say, I'm using the select case here. So select case based on what? Based on score. So case 70 to 100. So if you have a text box, it will display A. Case 60 to 69, B. 50 to 59, C. 45 to 49, D. Else. So we have case 0 to 39, that. I can add else, such that when you enter a score that is not between 0 and 100, that is an invalid score. So case else, it will just tell you you've entered what? An invalid score. So that's that. And I also have the code here for prime number. So you can practice this on your own. It's part of the material of the slide that I'll share with you. So you can also practice this. So let's look at the third control structure, which is looping. As I said earlier, when I introduced us to the three basic control structures, the sequence, looping, and selection. So I mentioned it then that looping allows a set of instructions, right, to be executed repeatedly. So each repetition statement is controlled by a loop index. And that loop index has what? An initial and a final value. All right. So you have an initial and you also have what? A final value. For example, if I want something to be repeated a number of times, let's say 5 times, starting from 1 to 5. So I can make 1 my what? My initial value, and 5 the what? The final value. So when at iteration 1, whatever I want to repeat, I have my group of statements. At iteration 2, the same set of statements to be repeated. Iteration 3, the same set of statements to be repeated until I get to what? To the final value. So the index begins with its initial value and can be incremented or decremented, right? Or changed in some way you desire during the loop body. So each time the loop is executed, you have an index value that is compared to the final value to test whether to execute the loop once again. So that's how it works. The index is always compared to the final value. Oh, should I stop now? Yes or no? If no, it goes again until it gets to that final value. So the initial and the final values must be of the same data type. You have to take note of this. So, and it's also possible in compound conditional statements to have more than one index. We have conditional looping. I think I mentioned this at the end of the class. We have conditional looping and unconditional looping. So look at in this case.
Just look at repair for me. Let me go repair myself. I go now.
So for unconditional looping, VP has the 4 next statements. for what? Unconditional looping. So the for next statement is an unconditional looping statement that is used when you know in advance how many times you want your loop to be what? To be executed. For next statement is what? An unconditional looping statement that is used when you know in advance how many times you want your loop to be what? Executed. Or I want to execute this 5 times, meaning that you have a group of statements that are repeated 5 times. I want to execute these 3 times, meaning that you have a what? You have a group of statements that you want to repeat a number of times, just three what? Just 3 times. So just as we've seen for the others, the if then statement, if then else if, they all have their what syntax. So in VB, this is the general form for the what? For the for next statements. So you have for index equals to what? Value 1 to value 2, step, value 3. This is the syntax. You cannot change it. I cannot change it. For index equals to, that's the start value. For index, for example, for index equal to 1, 2, 3, step 1. Meaning that if I have 1 to 3, step 1, it means increment my index value by 1. So initially, index value is 1. It will execute my statements. That step means go one step at a time. How many steps should you go? If I say step 1, that means after 1, the next value should be 2. It will repeat my statements. Whatever statements that I want to be repeated, it will repeat then. It goes again to 3. Remember, my stop value is 3. So when it gets to 3, it stops. So that is what your step value does. For example, let me say I have for index equals to 1 to 9, step 2. What will be my values? Let me repeat, 1 to 9, step 2. After 1, the next value will be 3, right? Because I said step 2. After 3, it will skip 4, it will go to 5. After 5, it will go to 7. After 7, it will go to 9 because my step is what? 3. 2. If it was step 1, 1 to 9, step 1. After 1, it goes to 2. After 2 to 3. After 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1 to 9, step 3. After 1, it goes to 4. After 4, it goes to 7. After 7, the next value is 10. But because that 10 is already greater than my stop value, it stops at 7. So we have 1, 4, 7. That means whatever I have will just be repeated 3 times. If I have 1 to 10, step 4. 1 to 10, step 4. After 1 is 5. After 5 is 9. The next value is greater than my stop value, which is 10. So 1, 5, and 9, that's just 3 times. To repeat whatever I want to repeat, just 3 times. Yeah. So note, value 1 and value 2 represent the initial and final values of the index respectively. So this is an example. Write a section of code to add integers or integer numbers from 0 to 19 and print the sum. I know if I give you this to write, you can say, okay, I want to enter first number, enter second number, enter third number. No, I can make use of my what? For next statement. All right. Initial sum here, what this implies is that I have an initial sum which is 0, and for I equals to 0 to 19, from 0 to 19. So now let's see what is going to happen there. For I, this is my index, right? This is my index variable, I, equal to, remember the syntax. For index equals to value 1, so value 2, step value 3. The step value is optional, right? If you do not put the step value, by default, it is 1, right? By default, it is what? 1. That is, it goes one step at a what? At a time. But if your step value is going to be a different value, right? Then you have to specify what the step value should what be. But in the case where you do not specify what the step value should be, VB sets a default step value of what? 1. So in this case, you can see for index equals to value 1 to value 2, step value 3. So The same format is followed here. For index equals to value 1 to value 2, step value 3. The only part that is missing here is what? Step, the step value, the step, that's the keyword step and the step value. And since that is not here, what does that imply? It means that VB will use the what? The default value for step, which is what? 1. I is starting from 0. That is, initially I is 0. Since the default step value is 1, after 0, I becomes 1. After that, I becomes 2. After that, I becomes 3. After that, it becomes 4, becomes 5. Do you get it? Up to the stop value, which is what? 19. So at every iteration, I has a value, which is what? Can be 0 to what? To 19. And what is happening? You see that there's a statement between that 4 and next. That next I just means once it has executed this statement, the only statement that we have here is what? Sum equals to sum plus I. Once this is executed, it go to the next I, and it knows how to get to the next I. Next I is just increment it by the step value. And our step value here is 1 because it's not specified. So just increment it by 1. All right. So now, what is happening in this case? Initially, my sum is equal to 0, right? So my sum is equal to 0. And for I equals to 0 to 19 means that I will take, at different points in time, I will take values from 0 to 19. So the start value of I is 0. Initially, I is 0. So what will happen? Sum is equal to sum plus I. This sum here is equal to sum. What is my sum? Is 0 plus I. And what is I? 0. 0 plus 0 will give me 0. Sum is equal to 0. Next I means go to the next value of I. It has used I equal to 0. Next value of I is 1. It goes again. Sum equals to, what is the last sum that it saved? 0. 0 plus 1, 1. Sum is now 1. That's the only statement we have to execute. It goes to the next I, all right? Next I is now 2. Sum is equal to 1 plus 2. Sum is now 3, right? It goes to the next I, 3. Sum is equal to sum plus I. That's 3 plus 3, 6. Sum is now 6. It goes to the next I, which is 4. 6 plus 4 will give me 10. So it goes to the next I, which is 5. Add it to sum. 10 plus 5, 15. It has saved 15 as sum. It goes to the next I, which is 6. 15 plus 6, 21. So it goes like that until it gets to what? 19. Sum equals to sum plus 19. It will get the value. Next I is 20. But remember that your stop value is 19. So it will now exit that loop and go to the next statement. And the next statement after next I is what? Print sum. So the final value of sum that has computed will then be what? Will then be printed. So that's how the loop works in this what? In this particular example. So I also added another example for prime numbers, which I would have loved to run. Okay, so we have this. You can also study this as well. Here we have a loop. You can see count equals to 0. For j equals to 3 to 50, count equals to 0. This is supposed to print prime numbers from what? From 2 to 50. All the prime numbers that you have from what? From 2 to 50. This is going to print them. All right. So for conditional looping, in this case, this is a situation in which the computer can only execute instructions in a loop if certain conditions hold. Here, you don't need to specify the number of times, right, that your loop is going to be what? Repeated. The repetition of your loop is dependent on a particular condition, or let me say on some conditions. It's only in as much as those conditions or the condition is true, your loop is going to be repeated. It will be repeated until that condition is no longer satisfied. So if this is this, repeat. In as much as that condition is true, it will keep repeating. You see, you don't have to specify. In this case, this example, we know that our loop is going to repeat 20 times. When I is 0, when I is 1, when I is 2, when I is 3, up to when I is 19, 20 times. We know this already. But in conditional, you may not know ahead, right? The number of times that the loop is going to be repeated. but there's a condition that you have attached that in as much as this condition remains true, keep repeating. So automatically, it will stop repeating the loop once the condition is what? False. So that's why it is what? Conditional. The looping is dependent on the what? On the truth value of your what? Of your condition. Either it is true or false. So if it is true, the loop can keep repeating, and when it is false, it stops. So that is conditional looping. And VB has the do loop statement. The do loop statement is used when the number of passes through a loop is not known in advance. I've explained that. So it always begins with a do statement and it ends with what? A do statement. We have 4 forms of this, of the do loop statements, which I will share with us. So the first and second forms, we have pretest. In pretest, the condition is tested, right? Before your statements are executed. That's pretest. While in post-test, the statement has been executed before the condition is tested. So you can have pre-test or post-test. So I have these 4 examples or these 4 forms. I have them on the next slide. So you can see pre-test. We have do until loop and do while loop. So what this is, I equals to 1. Remember, this is pre-test. So it has to check if the condition is true or false before it goes to what? To execute your statement. Here we have 2 statements. Print I and increment I plus 1. Do until I equals to what? 11. Remember, it is pretest. Initially, what is I? I equals to 1. So it has to check this condition first. That is pretest before it executes these statements. Do until I equals to 11, it checks. Is I equal to 11? No. It will print I. I equals to I plus 1, that is increment I plus 1. I is now 2. Is I equal to 11? No. You can see do until I equals to what? 11. It will keep repeating until that condition is what? Is true. So now, if I is 11, what will happen? It will not come here because once this condition is true, all right, it stops executing. Do until I equals to what? 11. So in as much as that condition remains false, it keeps repeating. I equals to 11. No, I is not 11. It prints it. All right. So when I is now 11, it exits the what? The loop. So the do until performs in opposite, or let me say in an opposition manner to what? Do while. Do while, you can see, if do while I is less than or equal to 10. Once I is less than or equal to 10, it will keep printing. But do until is when that condition, do until, once the condition is false, it will execute, right? But once that condition is true, it stops. Do while, once the condition is true, it will repeat. But once the condition is false, it will exit the loop. So that's how do until and do while works. So if you want to use any, I will recommend do while because do while is more straightforward than do until. It's very easy to make a mistake when you are using what? The do until, right? So the do while is easier and more straightforward to use than the what? Than the do until, because do while this condition is true. While that condition is true, your statements are being what? Are being repeated. But do until is when that condition is false, that the statements are executed. Once the condition is true, it stops executing. But do while, and what's the essence of this? Once this condition is true, repeat. So it's better for you to look at when the condition is true and repeat based on that than repeating when the condition is what? Is false. But depending, anyone that you are more comfortable with. But like I said, do while is what? Is more straightforward to use than what? Than do until. So we have while went, can use while when too. So while followed by a logical expression, your statement and when. So where you have your do, while, and loop. So you can also use while when. So just put while, and instead of putting loop, put when. That's like just with the same way we have end if and end select. So that's so that when is like while end, like end while. All right. So they combine both to form what? When. Okay, done this. Okay, yeah. I think that's That's the end of the class because the only thing we had left last week was control structures. And I told you that we'll look at the selection and the looping structure in the Visual Basic. So before we call it a day, let me quickly mention this. Your logbook, right? You have 4 questions there. You have 4 questions there, and you have to answer these questions, all the 4 questions. Yes, you are answering all the 4 questions. And you see that for each question, you have a problem statement, right? That problem statement is the question that you have to answer. And I think that has been printed on that page for you. You can see the problem statement. That's the question you have to answer. Then for each question also, for each problem statement, you have analysis. Analysis is what? How you want to go about that problem, what the input will be, what the output will be, what your processing or your logic will be, right? But the questions that you are given, none of them requires computation or logic, right? So for your analysis, I would recommend that you state, okay, this question requires the use of 2 labels, one text box, one command button. The labels will be named like this. The text boxes will be named like this, and the command button will be named like this. Because if it was a question that involves computation, I think the analysis would have been very smooth. But yeah, so for analysis, you can just state how you can state what will appear on your form, right? This would require the use of 2 labels. One label will be named this, just according to the question. Do your analysis based on the problem statement. This require a label, or it require 2 labels. It require this number of text boxes. It could require this command button. So you can do that for your analysis. Then for your design, so your design, draw what your form will look like, right? Your form. You can say, I've not told you to print anything yet. Analysis, you are writing. Your design, you can draw what your form will look like, okay? This is my form. I have, remember you stated it earlier that you should have this label, you should have this text box. So your labels and your text box can appear, right? So your label, let me just show you what that should look like. So for your design, you have your form. All the labels that you want to use, put them in it. Your text box, draw it. Your command button based on the question, draw that as well. So once you have that, that is your what? Your design. Now your implementation is now your code, which you are writing as well. You are writing your implementation. That is the code for that problem statement. You are writing it. Okay, so are you there? Okay. So whereas each question is supposed to have an output. So you now print, you must have tested your code to be sure that it's working, right? You have to run it. So once you run it and it's giving you your desired output, you can take a screenshot of that output, then you print it and attach it for question number 1. Now, let me be clear. The only thing you are printing is output. Analysis, you are writing, right? You write. This will have this number of labels. It will have this number of text boxes. There will be a command button. The command button will be named this. You are writing. You are not printing analysis. Because if you do anything contrary to what I'm saying here, there's going to be a penalty for that. That's why I'm taking my time now to just explain this to you once more. So analysis, you are writing. Design, draw the form. You know what your form is, draw it. Show the labels and the text boxes and the command buttons in your form, on your form. Just draw. Don't do anything other than that. So just draw your form. That's for a particular question. Implementation, you are writing. This is the code. I don't know, maybe 5 lines, 10 lines, depending on how you have implemented. So 10 lines, that is okay. 12 lines, if it is 12 lines, that is okay as well. So you are writing. The only thing that you are printing is your output to be sure that your code worked. So you print that and attach it for question 1. That's the output for question number 1. You attach it. And if possible, you might not attach the whole A4 paper. You can just cut out that part where you have your what? Your output. So it doesn't have to be, the paper does not have to be too long. Do you get it? So you can just cut it out, attach it with the implementation. That show that your code is working. Then go to problem number 2, right? The problem statement has been written. It comes to the logbook. Do the analysis, right? Design, draw the form for that one, all right? Implementation, write the code for that one. Run it. That output again, just cut it out. If you print it out, just cut it out. Attach it for problem number 2. That one is sorted. The third question, do the same thing. Should we print out the design? I've said it clearly. The only thing you are printing for each question is output. Which section is the flow chart supposed to be drawn? Your flow chart can be drawn in design. I think there is more than enough space for design. Yes, you can draw with pencil. Yes, you can draw your design with pencil. Your design is just your form. And if you want to add your flow chart to it, that is fine. All right. If you want to add flow chart, that is fine, but that can come under design. All right. So the only thing you are printing is output. That means for the 4 questions, you are only printing 4 things. The output for question 1, output for question 2, output for question 3, output for question 4. If you print anything apart from this, it's -5. Please, we don't want your papers. Is output the same thing as implementation? No. Implementation is the code, all right? Output is the form that is now working as it's supposed to be. So they are different. Question 4 has 2 outputs. What is question 4? Both of them can, okay, let me see. Both of them, both of them can be implemented as one code. So if you run for addition, right, that is fine. If you run for subtraction, that is fine. So that's not a problem. It's just one, each of them has an output. When you run it, that question 4, you can either do addition or subtraction, right? So depending on which one you are choosing. So if you run addition, show the output for that. If you are selecting subtraction, show the output for that. So that is all. So let me see, which question have I not attended to? Sir, should you write everything with pencil? If you can write with pencil and it will be very clear, there's no problem. Your algorithm should be in analysis. Your algorithm should be in analysis. And if you look at all the questions, it's not even everything that we have. The only question that we have an algorithm is question 4. Because question 1, write a program and design a form with label such that when you click on the command button name, your name appears on label. Yeah. Which algorithm do you want to write for this? They just said you should design a form such that when you click on the command button, your name will appear in the label. Which algorithm do you want to write for this? So the only one that probably have an algorithm is where you have write a program to add and subtract 2 integer numbers. Okay, so I think that's the only one that we have an algorithm. You are using Visual Studio 2022. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. So starting from, you have the grace of this week, all right? Starting from next week, Monday, you can start submitting at the lab. And there's no individual submission, okay? There's no individual submission. If you are submitting, you make sure you submit to your course rep, all right? So your course rep, I don't know how your course rep is going to bring down for some large departments. I don't know how your course rep is going to bring down your logbooks down to computer science department, but maybe with the help of the assistants, you can be able to get the logbooks down to the department here. So we have a lab, computer science lab 204, either 204 or 209. Once you get there, you meet the lab attendants there, so they will attend to you. And as they submit the logbook, I will advise that you write down the names of students. You write down names of students as they submit the logbook to you for accountability. So there won't be a case where someone will say, I submitted the logbook to a course rep, but I can't find mine or something. Do you get it? So if you're a course rep, as they submit to you, I will advise that you write down their names as they submit to you. And also, for the course rep, remember I said for the other students, no individual submission, all right? And if you have a genuine reason why you might be considered for individual submission, of course, you can always reach out to any of the lecturers involved or your course rep. So it's your course rep that will communicate with us, not you meeting us directly about submission or anything, okay? So group submission is better. Group submission is what is better. The recorded version, the YouTube link that was sent, that's the YouTube link has the recorded version already. So once you can keep hold of that link, even for the previous lectures that we have had, the YouTube links that I sent out, then they are still valid. They are valid forever. So in case you want to access the recorded version, so you can always make use of that link. Just make sure that the link is saved somewhere. What can those that have done the assignment in another way, what can they do? How did you do it? Okay, in the YouTube, your screen wasn't clear enough. Okay, it's fine. So maybe I would also send the Zoom link to your course reps. So in that case, you remind your course reps you should tell your course reps to remind you, because if they don't ask for it, I might forget. So in that case, because this one is being recorded, so your course rep can help you to and get the link from me, so you can share it with you. He or she will be able to share it with you. So I think we've come to the end of the class. So you can start submitting your logbooks from next week, Monday. All right. Thank you for your time. So, sorry. I have chapter 9, but before I take that chapter, the another lecturer will take the next class, which is Dr. Nweri. So he'll be the one to take the next class. I think the next 3 classes will be taken by him. And after he concludes his lectures with you guys, then I'll treat the last chapter for this course, which is chapter 9. So we'll give you submission deadline. Okay, maybe ending of or no, the week after convocation. Okay, next week is convocation. So don't worry, ending of January. Ending of January. So ending of January. Okay. Thank you guys. Bye.